Welcome back to the Horse Racing Show, episode 31. Thank you for liking and subscribing on YouTube, listening on iTunes or Google Play. Now we have been downloaded, moved up to 17 countries, as well as all throughout the United States. We appreciate hearing from you as well. I've always enjoyed talking to this person and working with her, especially going back to the days of a show called Today at the Races. Caton Bredar joins us now, well-known, respected journalist in the business of horse racing, working for TVG. So you can also hear her on weekends on the Sirius Radio Network. And Caton is with us. Hello, Caton. Welcome to Today at the Races, Part 2.
Yeah, I feel like this is your life, Caton Bredar, which is a good thing.
Got 20 years, Caton, since that show.
I know. And, I was thinking about this the other day when I was sitting a Saturday afternoon at home watching all the coverage, whether it was on TVG. I was watching Naira's presentations of their big races. I was watching off of just the simulcast feeds from some of the other tracks. And I was thinking that it seemed such a crazy idea when we did Today at the Races. And yet it's sort of the prototype for everything that's on that concerns horse racing these days. I mean, really, that's what they do. They sit down and they show as many races as possible and have some commentators to try to put some perspective or explain what's happening and try to pick some winners, mostly futilely. But I mean, it really is exactly what we're doing now all the time and what everybody seems to want. But at the time, it seemed like such a crazy revolutionary idea.
We should get more credit for that, shouldn't we?
Exactly, right?
They should run a little crawl at the bottom and say, thanks to Today at the Races. Because, I don't know how many people, I think people remember it. I still have people come up to me, I'm sure they do you, and mention the show. But you're right. When this show started, it was around 97, I think, wasn't it? Somewhere around there, 96, 97?
It was. And the thing was, at that time, even simulcasting was still sort of a new thing.
Right.
I mean, and so the opportunity to get to see more than one track in a short time span was something. It was a very rare treat for race fans, and for us, it was something that you didn't really know how to reset and prepare and be ready for the action coming from all different places. It seemed like it happened so fast, and then when I look back now and I think about how many races we did and how many races are done on a regular basis, it's really almost funny, but it was a good thing. And I like to think it was an important, kind of progression or stepping stone for everything that's happening now. So but at the time it not only seemed crazy and this wild idea, but it just went by so quick, right? I mean,
Caton, it flew by.
So
and it was fun. What was about a 6-year run or something with that show, or 7?
Exactly.
And then about that time, that's when they start putting money, the NTRA started putting money into this upstart thing called TVG. And then, of course, HRTV came later on. But at that time, you're right, simulcasting wasn't as sophisticated as it is today. And so if you wanted to see a live race and get the results right then, Today at the Races on ESPN2 was kind of the place to be. And even sometimes, remember at night when we would do those quarter horse races from Los Alamitos, we'd do late edition. Then we'd come on at midnight Eastern time or 1 o'clock Eastern time at night.
All from the magic of Tulsa, Oklahoma. It was great.
I remember flying from Lexington to Tulsa and do a race at Keeneland. I remember watching Charismatic win the Lexington at Keeneland. I'm out in Oklahoma at a studio for ESPN watching that race.
And, I think about it too, and it was all boiled down to small windows of time that we were actually on the air.
Yeah.
And but you had to be there obviously in advance to know that you would be, and it wasn't as if we had, all sorts of flights coming in and out of Tulsa. So right. Sometimes you had to come a day in advance, for basically whether it was a half hour window or if it was a couple of shows or the ones that were late at night. But when I think about it now, and it was kind of like you had a couple hours of work total, including maybe half an hour to an hour on
right.
air. And then the whole rest of the time was just kind of having fun, trying to bone up on your information and background, and then exploring Tulsa, right? I mean, that's what we did.
Yeah.
We spent a lot of quality time at the DoubleTree, and
That's right.
it really was. It was so interesting because now it's the same type of concept, but most of the time, whether it's in the TVG studios, which fortunately I get to be at the racetrack most of the time, and I think the same for you in any of your racing coverage.
Right.
But so we're like there. So you kind of almost by osmosis pick up on what's happening rather than have to sit someplace else and research and try to, and also try to fill time. But it was interesting and it was fun. It really was.
And as a lot of networks do, ESPN farmed that show out to a company that was based in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So, yeah, they were in Connecticut, we know. That's why Caton and I wound up in Tulsa. Probably, what do we do, like 15, 20 shows a year? Does that sound right?
There was a time period, I would say that's about right, but it was usually condensed. I want to say late summer, early fall was when we did the majority of the shows. So it's kind of when things were heating up toward Breeders' Cup and also just sort of championship runs. And you did get the best of all worlds in the races. I mean, the best part for me was getting a chance to see racing from places that normally I would never get to see too. I mean, when you talk about Los Alamitos and bringing those races in, that was not on my main, circuit or a place that I normally at that time would have gotten opportunity to see those races. So it really exposed you to racing from all over the country. And I think it did the same for the people that were watching it too.
Talking to the well-known analyst of horse racing with TVG. We used to be with ESPN back when they did horse racing, and with Sirius Radio, Caton Bredar. And Caton, you know what I remember especially about those summers, especially when we got into this month of the year, we were always cut short by the Little League World Series.
Yes.
Remember we would have like planned, and you had a 22-minute show roughly with commercials that we would pack in like 4 live races, which is pretty impressive in 22 minutes.
It was, and I mean, and consider that we were trying to make sure that we gave a little bit of build up to the race, and then our explanation who was in it, and then summarize what happened afterwards, be able to make it official and get the prices.
Right.
That was always the sticky part, though, because inevitably one of those races, if not more, would be delayed or have some sort of issue, or maybe there was an inquiry or objection, and then we would have to go off the air without making it official, which was always a treat. People loved that.
And people would get mad, and I would tell them, hey, well, at least you're getting something on the air. Horse racing, trust me, you're getting preempted a lot by the Little League World Series. So in the pecking order, you're still down the list, but you're getting something on the air.
Well, exactly. You get to see the race, and that's the most important part.
Right.
And, the same thing, what's interesting is the same thing happens now periodically where other events and other activities that have perhaps paid more money to be on the air or have bigger sponsors are going to get priority. And so, again, you're going to get preempted. And I know people get mad about that. But the problem is, unless you want to ante up more, or unless we have bigger sponsors that want to really showcase racing, I mean, that's the easy solution to get it, but you're gonna have to dig deep because a lot of these places are paying a lot of money for those spots.
Oh yeah, and and a lot of these sports, let's face it, they bring in the audience that the demographic people, the buying people are looking for, the fast food and the beer places. You're bringing in an audience that can still get out and buy. We skew a little older in horse racing. Not exactly. You and I, Kate, and I'm talking about those other people.
Not us.
Those other people.
Young.
Yes.
Forever young. But that is one of the things. You get a lot of people who are upset about network coverage in general. I'm sure you've experienced this with NBC, that it's never exactly what everybody wants that are watching, as far as the placement of it or the timing or how much time is allotted and whether it's preempted. But the beauty of this is now we've come to a point where you have TVG and you have the network coverage, so that I would say 99.9% of the time, even if you don't get the official results or even if you don't get the coverage, you will have it on TVG, so that one really supports and leads to the other back and forth.
Right.
And if you did go off the air without an official or without knowing how something played out, you would be able to flip to TVG or, a host of other entities out there to be able to give coverage. And I kind of think it's the best of all worlds that very few sports have that extensive of a television network that's on 24/7 that can kind of fill in the gaps, and one kind of builds and holds up the other.
Yeah, and with these iPhone, you remember the days, and you don't have to go all that far back, but I remember the days when they would put the padlock on the payphone at the racetrack.
Oh, yes.
That was a big deal because you don't want anybody run out there calling that bookie just before they go to post or try to pass post it or something like that. And now it's funny, everybody's got iPhones out. And you can, like you say, you can get the results. Heck, I can look at an iPhone and get results of races I forgot were being run that day. I can get the second race of the day or the third race of the day, whatever's going on.
People don't realize, when I grew up, for a short time, we lived in the trailer park that was attached to Arlington Park. And a lot of trainers lived there, and my dad was a trainer, but a lot of families of people who worked there were there. And the trailer park was technically Arlington Park's property, and they would shut down all the phones at that time, and that included the trailer park. So when the racing was going on at Arlington, we had no phones. I said, now, anybody thinks about that now, and I mean, it's just unfathomable that there was a time, right? And then I was thinking too, when for a time I worked in publicity at Calder Racecourse, and when I was in charge, we were still at a time where there wasn't near as much simulcasting, and there were still a lot of limitations. And technically, you were not supposed to give out results over the phone. That was illegal.
Right.
And people would call to. There were all kinds of side numbers games and things that went on side bets. And people would call on a regular basis to the publicity office or to the press box to try to get the results, the numbers that they were then using for other purposes. And we weren't allowed to give those out, and people would get so mad.
Exactly.
I just think about that now, and I think, I don't know that there are even those numbers games that go on anymore, but if they are, it's pretty easy to get what you need.
Heck, there's people with their phones out taping or getting a video of what's going on as it is, and texting it out or tweet. That's the one thing that's funny about horse racing, and we talked about this the other day when I was talking to you about being on today, and I'm thrilled you're on, Caton Bredar. You know that. But,
well, I am so happy that it worked out, because I mean, I really feel like, I feel like we do go back a ways as far as the on-air experiences, and it was always a lot of fun, and so it's great to be with you today.
Let's just say, if it wasn't for us, there'd be no TVG. Okay, that's not true, but I said it.
We'll say it. Hey,
we'll say it. Well, they'll call you in at the next meeting, don't you? They'll say, "Hey, don't ever go on that show again with that guy." But
the best part about my relationship with TVG, living in Kentucky and working the way I do, is I never have to go to meetings.
Meetings are the worst, aren't they?
It's the best.
But we're talking about all this stuff that you can get right now, like over your phone, and you can get the video and all that. But yet horse racing, and we've learned this from our guest. I mentioned it a couple weeks ago. I said, if I had like an MMA fighter on, and I've covered that world some too, they probably would have like 40, 50,000 followers. They would tweet out that they're on this show. Or whatever show they're on, okay? In horse racing, you've got some of the biggest names in horse racing. They don't even tweet. Some of them don't even have an account, or they're not socially media active out there. And they don't have to be. And that's the one thing I noticed about this sport compared to about everybody else. Baseball players, everybody else is tweeting out. Now, I know some jockeys do. You've got one of the bigger followings out there in the horse racing world, which is great. People love you. But there's not a lot of... it's still, I'd say, behind the times compared to other sports in being aggressive in the social media world. I think that's fair.
I believe that. I really believe that it's a small circle of people who are talking to each other on social media, instead of it being what I think its intended purpose, or at least from the standpoint of other sports, are, which is to branch out and build this bigger social network. And I think in part, it's because of the age demographic and because of racing in general. But I also blame the powers that be a little bit, because I think that we tend to be a tradition-bound sport, and instead of being open. And I think the same thing happened when Today at the Races occurred. I mean,
Yeah.
and the same thing happened when TVG launched. And I think you'll see it even now in terms of the coverage of horse racing. I'm sure that you've experienced this with NBC. The minute anybody tries anything new, it's attacked.
Oh, it is.
I mean, I love our fans and I appreciate our fans,
Right,
and
me
I
too.
know, but they are, it's a tough nut to crack, because I guess a lot of them have had to work so hard to maintain their status or their fan position and admiration of the sport, that now they are afraid to ever kind of try something different or open it up to other people who maybe aren't as familiar with it, or who have a different way of looking at it and expressing it and passing it along. And I thought it was funny the other day when there was I think Naira used in their show the smoke and the smoke machine and the entrance of the jockeys for the and I thought it was great for the Alabama. I thought it was really fun, and I was just looking at social media, and even my husband Doug said, whether you liked it or you didn't like it, really, you're gonna rip it? I mean, why?
See, that's what I look at. At what point does this change the way the race is going to be run? At what point does it affect the race in any way? I think it's great. I think you should, as I always said, and I hosted those Eclipse Awards for 4 years, and they're not like a happy bunch overall. And
I'm sorry, you can't ever get those years back, can you?
I know, but and I don't mean, and I'm really not knocking anyone, but I think that there is such a golf clap reverence always that what we try to do on this show, like having personalities on and people in the business like you, and it's not a critique of criticism. It's just, I guess if there's anything, it's trying to be constructive a little bit, that, it's contagious if people are laughing and having fun and enjoying it. And I'll flip on and I'll watch like a college football game that I don't really care about, but it gets kind of interesting and the crowd's into it, and you go, I may stay around and watch this. And honestly, I didn't think I'd be watching a Northern Illinois football game today. But I'm doing it because it's fun. And I think when you see a horse race, oftentimes you feel like you almost like going to a church service.
Oh, exactly. And I think what's going to happen, and this will be very interesting to watch. Hopefully, I'm around to watch it over the next 20 years. But is to see what happens with the introduction of sports gambling in this country, because I think that part of the problem has been for racing that you have that gambling aspect, and the two worlds, the world of just sport and fun and competition, and the world of gambling, were two worlds that were kind of clashing at times.
Right.
And I also feel like sometimes it was because there was just a misunderstanding between the two sides of what they were watching and what they were doing. And now, and let's face it, I mean, everybody's been betting on sports for years, but it hasn't been on the broad scale of, presentation and when you're watching it, how network coverage is geared, because you haven't had legalized gaming throughout the country. So now that we do, or now that we're getting closer to it, and over the next, 2 decades, I'm sure you're going to see it, kind of explode in terms of the programming and in terms of the audience, and a lot more carryover. I'm curious to see if we see more of a melding of the two worlds in horse racing, that instead of it being kind of struggling to figure out its identity, it becomes so much more like other sports, which are that, sports that people bet on, sports that people cheer for, sports that people enjoy. And I think that, along with what's happening in terms of the emphasis on safety and on, looking out for horses and equine welfare, that those things are going to be the points that set the tone for the industry going forward. And if we can kind of address them and keep looking at constructive ways to show how great the sport is and how much fun it can be. I don't think it'll be the church that it's been that everybody goes into. And I agree with you. I think that, that it's the same thing happened with TVG in the earliest days. And we were reading some things on social media and said, boy, people just want to hate. And I said, well, that's the nature of everything, right? I mean, just everybody, you're always going to get twice as many people that publicly, especially if they don't have to use their name, in a social forum.
That's my favorite thing. I don't like you. You stink. Who are you? I'm not going to tell you. Especially when they say, the thing I'm proudest of with NBC and I like, and I think it's great, is telling the stories that we tell. I don't want to sound too self-serving. I'm not always me telling. I'm all the people that work. We all tell the stories and the features. And we did a little bit of that with Today at the Races way back. We would try to give a little background on the people as much as possible, because it's like saying, like, football. People love to bet football. College season's getting ready to start back. Billions of dollars will be bet on that legally, or still a few bookies out there that you go through. But the whole point of that is, when you're a kid, you learn about football, you learn about first downs and what they're going to do in passing situations and all this and that. And I've always told the people that will listen to me in horse racing, I said, get them to the track first. Tell them a little bit about what's going on first before you hand them a racing form and say, hey, let's go over here and learn how to wheel an exacta or a try. Let them learn the sport for a couple of visits before they maybe lose some money and they go, I don't even know how I lost my money. That's why I don't play poker. I'm not a good card player.
Well, it is one of those things. The storytelling, I think, is the key part of it, and that's what I enjoy the most, and that's what I think that network gives opportunity to do that more even than, say, TVG does, which is why we need everything, and we need both components as far as the coverage goes, because that was one of the things in the Triple Crown coverage that I think people so look forward to, is the opportunity to take a bit more time to learn about the horses and the stories around the people who are participating in it. And, I think that drives handle as much as anything. And I think that we've proven it. I mean, if you think of your coverage of Patch, for example, just one horse, but who really, if not for that, if he didn't have an eye issue and he was just named Patch for no apparent reason other than maybe a kid liked the name or something. And nobody told that story, no one would have bet on him, cheered for him. He became one of the most photographed horses that didn't win the Derby that I've ever seen in my life. Everybody would come to Pletcher's Barn. They wanted to take their picture with Patch. Nobody cared about the horses that were better.
They wanted the one-eyed horse. That was it. And I mean, we did a story on that, all the mentions of Patch, and Patch was mentioned, like 30 times. Everybody that was there covered, all the stand-ups of the different reporters around the track, not just on the NBC show, but all week long.
Exactly.
Local and national, and Patch. That was probably the most announced word that week, outside of maybe a couple of the real contenders.
But, it drove the price down on him because everybody wanted a couple dollars on the horse that they had heard the story about. And I think that, that the same is true in any sports. I mean, there's going to be more money bet on football when somebody has a rooting interest.
Yeah.
The reason they get into it is because they have a team to follow and they know about the sport. But even somebody who doesn't know about the sport hears a story that resonates. They start watching it, and then they may want to bet. Too, before it's done. And there is a place for all of it. And I think that it's going to be, I'm very hopeful that although a lot of people are afraid that it's going to minimize racing because there's so much more money that's going to be bet on other sports rather than racing, that it could actually help racing because we've been doing it much longer in a legal and widespread capacity than any of the other sports. So the truth is, I think that the other sports could learn a little something from racing, but I think for the benefit of the fans and the exposure and the social media, this could be a plus. It really could be. That's what's happening at TVG, especially. And there's going to be a transition, and a lot of people are very afraid. But I think the network is pretty committed, and just as NBC has been in terms of their broadening their coverage of horse racing and utilizing, NBC Sports Network and even online things to use racing. Racing's gotten much more exposure as a result, even though were countless other sports the truth is that racing is one of the best on television for this medium and for radio and for internet of anything. Because it's so fascinating and it's so unpredictable. So I think it could be a good thing. I'm hoping, and I'm hoping that it does get everybody to lighten up a little bit too, because I think, that it's always the most boring thing in the world, right? Going to the Eclipse Awards, because I mean, it should be the most.
Well, they'll never have us back, will they? I didn't mean to get
No,
on
I
that,
don't
but
think they will.
it was funny, you know. I mean,
it was like nobody takes a joke.
I know, and applause, and I'd look out, and thank goodness Zenyatta, I was there for like 2 of her years, is because at least I was looking at, like, Jerry Moss was happy, and John Sheriff's happy, Mike Smith, they were happy, you know.
Right,
I see Baffert over in the corner and Pletcher. I see some people that were happy, and I see other people. I go, man, you got a lot of money, and your horse may win an award. Be happy. But I didn't say that. But now I'm going to guess that Caton Bredar had no other option but to stay in the horse business. Your father, Raymond, a well-respected trainer. Your grandfather, Ted Atkinson, is a Hall of Fame jockey. And your husband, Doug, a longtime respected racing executive, now a jockey agent. There was no escaping. You were going to do something in the horse racing business.
Well, you would think that, but let's just realize that I have a sister who had nearly the same experience outside of marrying anybody in the racing industry. And she is a high school math teacher, just had an accounting major, and she does go to the races, but she doesn't have a professional stake in it. She roots for us. So, I think it's one of those things, but I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I enjoyed writing when I enjoyed writing and working with horses. And the only jobs I really ever had, even outside of babysitting, were related to racing. So I got articles published even when I was pretty young, like about 16, that had to do with horse racing. And when I went to college, I went to Knox College in Galesburg, Illinois, because it was not that far from home. I could get home to watch the races. They had long breaks so that I could go in the winter from Thanksgiving all the way to New Year's and go to Florida with my dad's horses. So I kind of got the bug early, but I don't know that I knew what I wanted to do. I just figured it would probably be something to do with racetrack. And to be honest, the only job I could get or even tried for out of school was to work in publicity. Out of college, I got a job in publicity at Arlington Park at the year that after the fire, they had temporary facilities, and I had done, part-time work in press boxes and just whatever I could pick up here and there as sort of a runner or a fill-in person, but and then also galloped horses and worked around the horses. And I kind of thought that I would end up working with horses more as a trainer or whatever out of college, but everything kind of snowballed. One step led to the next in working in publicity. For a long time, I did both, and until there was enough to keep me busy just doing television. But it was a little crazy, and everybody says, "Oh, did you always plan it?" I said I had absolutely no idea. Just when the jobs came up, I took them, and each step led to the next. And I never dreamed, though, I'd do television, because I was really I didn't like to talk unless I knew what I was talking about. So I got marked down in college for class participation, and I never dreamed that I would be. Yes, I never dreamed that I would be doing anything that would be speaking in front of a big group. But one of the first jobs at Arlington, after working in the press box, I came back. I went to New York and worked for the New York Racing Association in the press box and as a press box writer. And then I had an offer to come back to Arlington on a year-round basis. And I said, well, what all would I do? And they put together different jobs. And one of them was doing breakfast at Arlington, which was handling the marketing, it was really great because it was a partnership between the Daily Herald, I think one of the other papers, definitely WGN Radio and the Daily Herald, and then Arlington. So we had radio, we had television, and we had and newspaper. And then they paid for us to have mugs made up and to do all the promotion of the event. And we would get sometimes as many as 1,000 people to come in the morning on Saturday or Sunday.
Yeah.
And then I would host the program. And I thought, I don't know what I'm doing with this. I mean, and luckily Jenny Ornstein had done a similar thing at
Yes.
Hialeah as well as in Chicago. And it's interesting because Jenny did the TV work that was sort of the precursor to Today at the Races. Remember, they did tried to do a national wager.
Right. I remember that.
And there was sort of it wasn't very well publicized, and I don't even know where it aired, but kind of a TV program to go along with the wager. And it didn't last very long, but I believe Jenny was one of several people who were on that program. But at any rate, Jenny was very, very helpful to me and just a wonderful person, a good friend. And she said, Caton, anytime you don't know what to say, just look at the racetrack. You'll see something and then explain it. And she was right. That's what there is always something to talk about in racing, whether it's the track surface, how they maintain the track, what somebody's doing on a horse. And so everything that I had done up till then kind of prepared me for that.
Yeah.
And then doing a live show like that, and I had Phil George F. was the co-host, so it couldn't have been more fun, unless, of course, it was you.
Oh, shucks, golly gee.
And I'd line up the guests. We'd have a trainer, we'd have a jockey, and we'd have a journalist or handicapper. And then we'd have a exhibition race in the middle from the starting gate, and Phil would call it. So the fans who had never been to the races in the afternoon, and there actually were quite a few, would get the chance to see what a schooling race looks like and what a horse is breaking from the gate and the thrill of crossing the finish line. And we'd choose somebody from the crowd to go down and get their picture taken in the winner's circle with the winning horse from the schooling race. So it was really a lot of fun. It was a great promotion, and it was a great learning ground. Plus, the people we invited on as guests were some of the biggest names in racing.
Yeah.
Because at that time, Arlington was really drawing quite a few big names for the big races on the weekends. And so it was absolutely the perfect opportunity.
And look where it's led to. Caton Bredar, well respected from her work at ESPN to now with TVG and Sirius. And I always enjoy talking to you and loved working with you. And thank you for coming on this little show I have called The Horse Racing Show.
Well, anytime. And I thank you for letting me go down memory lane instead of have to handicap, because that's always a no-win proposition.
Well, and you know
you're
what?
Wrong.
You're
wrong 70% of the time.
Exactly. I tell people, think of baseball. You hit 300 in baseball, you could go to the Hall of Fame. Don't get too critical on handicappers.
Exactly.
Caton, it's great to catch up. We'll do it again much sooner, okay?
Take care.
Thank you. Caton Bredar with us here. More on The Horse Racing Show when we come back.